Making It Personal with Bishop William Joensen on Iowa Catholic Radio and iowacatholicradio.com.
Welcome to Making It Personal with Bishop Joensen. I'm Kelly Mesher-Collins with the Diocese of Des Moines. On today's show, we're visiting with Deacon Patrick Lappert MD. Deacon Lappert is a board-certified plastic and reconstructive surgeon who has been in practice for over 25 years. He served as a reconstructive surgeon in the U.S. Navy and was chief of plastic and reconstructive surgery at the Portsmouth Naval Hospital. Dr. Lappert travels extensively, offering presentations on the ethics of transgender medicine and gender ideology in light of the Western tradition. He serves at Annunciation of the Lord Catholic Church in Decatur, Alabama. But before we get to today's interview, let's find out what's on the bishop's mind.
Really looking forward to Deacon Lappert. He's got a breadth of knowledge and can speak from various perspectives, and certainly has a lot of credibility on a very sensitive topic. So we'll be bringing him in here shortly. But here we are in an April that brought tropical temperatures and snow out of nowhere. I mean, welcome to Iowa here.
That's right.
But, hopefully we're feathering into May very well, and hopefully we'll get some flowers and showers and all that put together in a good way. But and, of course, the chrism season, the confirmation season is well underway, and it's so good to be with our young people, always trying to spend time with them and in conversation before we actually have the confirmation Mass. So this past week we were at St. John's Norwalk, and then Holy Spirit in Creston. Good engagements with those folks. Tomorrow we'll be at St. Mary, Holy Cross in Elkhart. They have a fairly large cohort, surprisingly. Sunday with two groups at St. Luke and Ankeny, and so there we go. Hope my brother Tom and his wife Jen aren't there. And they don't have anyone being confirmed this year, so that won't be a distraction. And then next week, St. Patrick Council Bluffs. So tonight we're doing the Mercy College graduation. We'll get a lot of time with Mercy College in recent weeks with the inauguration of Dr. Adrian Henry, a very solemn and festive affair, and really a great representation. I think his folks from Mississippi were there as well. Kelly, I don't know if you have any plans to take in the Drake Relays or not, or that's something.
Probably not. Sometimes I've done the road races.
Have you really?
Yeah,
right.
They have like a 5K and a 10K. I've done the 10K before, but I don't know if I'm quite there yet.
In training yet?
Yeah, I've been running, but I don't know if I'm ready for like that. They have a half marathon too.
Yeah. People have been asking me if I've been out on the bike very much, and the answer to that is sadly no. So that trainer is still seeing some use here, unfortunately. Yeah. But one of the interesting confirmation questions was one of the young women who asked me. She says, some of my friends kind of look at the church as a cult. What's the difference between a cult and the church? And that was a very provocative question, so it's kind of set me thinking in a way, and I was able to offer something of a response. But, I really kind of think about a cult, and we use that word in a neutral sense. We think about the cult of the Eucharist, all those practices, adoration, the devotions that surround that, to deepen our bond with Jesus, obviously, but with each other in the process of this. And so it's kind of that established sets of ways in which we habitually open ourselves to the Lord. And the cult of the Eucharist creates an environment, a culture whereby we hopefully can flourish in our faith, our love, our hope in Jesus. But cult in the more pejorative sense is kind of thinking about something that becomes very insular, that is more interested in closing off, that relies on some kind of secret knowledge that is not to be disclosed, but is to be possessed as a way of marking people out over and against others. One becomes very primarily interested in one's own spiritual enlightened status, one's salvation, if you will, over and against others with whom one has no care or has no interest in seeing their salvation. Hence, they are damned, if you will. Mm-hmm. And so the kind of closing off that's there. But when I think about the church, I think about, kind of drawing from biology, a kind of permeable membrane. There's a flow in and out of the established, recognized church into the culture and the community that surrounds it. We certainly profess beliefs that are fresh and freely disclosed, though with respect to a person's capacity to receive them. We don't unload the whole mystery of faith on somebody. And so even in this Easter season, we're in mystagogia. We're kind of unpacking the mystery of people who've experienced the grace of Christ in the sacraments of initiation, but then kind of seeing how that plays out in their own life. And then, of course, that profession leads us to public proclamation, as for the apostles, even if it has certain trials and challenges. So one's salvation depends on one's hope and efforts to draw others into community. A cult rejects the larger culture. The church is called out into the culture by Christ.
All right. We're going to take a quick break. When we return, we'll visit with Deacon Patrick Lappert, MD. You're listening to Making It Personal with Bishop Joensen.
Thank you to our business partner, Chip In for Charity, the St. Vincent de Paul Golf Fundraiser to fight hunger, Thursday, May 25th at Copper Creek Golf Course, 10 a.m. shotgun start. For registration and sponsorship opportunities, visit svdpdsm.org.
Iowa Catholic Radio would like to thank our business partner, Elite Glass and Metal, LLC in Johnson, a full-service glass and glazing contractor serving Des Moines and surrounding areas. New construction, existing projects, and residential. Learn more at EliteGlassandMetal.com.
Support for programming provided by Trappist Caskets, a work of the monks of New Melleray Abbey in Peosta, Iowa. Embracing an honest approach to death can more readily affirm the real meaning of life. Trappist caskets and urns are made in the prayerful environment of the monastery using Iowa-grown wood from the Abbey's sustainable forest. Each casket and urn is blessed by a monk. Quietly laboring with their hands for 175 years, the monks offer workmanship at the pinnacle of woodworker's craft. Available for immediate delivery or as a part of a pre-planning program. Learn more at TrappistCaskets.com.
Welcome back to Making It Personal with Bishop Joensen. On today's show, we're visiting with Deacon Patrick Lappert, MD. Deacon Lappert is a board-certified plastic and reconstructive surgeon who has been in practice for over 25 years. Dr. Lappert travels extensively, offering presentations on the ethics of transgender medicine and gender ideology in light of the Western tradition.
Good morning, Deacon Lappert. It's good to be with you again. You were in Iowa in early March to present to our clergy and their wives, the priests and the deacons and their wives, about this very topic that we're going to be exploring. So obviously today will be a much more succinct overview, but your own background. The show's called Making It Personal. We always like to hear a little bit about the story. I mean, you have an impressive portfolio, but came to the faith not as a boy, but the movings and as one with a deep scientific background, and obviously the clinical piece of this. But how did that happen? That awakening to Christian faith as a man of Jewish faith.
Well, I went by way of atheism and became sort of a devotee of scientific kind of worldview. But I had the great good fortune to marry well. I was a young medical student at the Bethesda Naval Hospital, and I met this precious woman who's been my wife now for 43 years. She was a Navy nurse and a Catholic girl from Philadelphia. And I think her quiet, patient example of Christian life was probably the single most important thing that ever happened to me in terms of my walk of faith. But as a boy, I had a very strong relationship to God, and I had a very strong prayer life. But that sort of left me. I became a very cynical boy when I was about 13 years old. And,
embittered by some tragedy, or just the adolescence kind of playing itself out?
Yeah, no, the divorce of my parents was the catastrophe. I never missed the opportunity to explain to people that divorce is no little thing in the heart of a child. And I became very cynical about a lot of things. And
the rupture of that fundamental bond and trust.
Left home when I was 15 years old.
Okay. Wow. And so your wife, then kind of like Mary Magdalene, apostle to the apostles here in a way, and drawing others, as women are really kind of the evangelists in so many ways on that interpersonal level. But so coming to the faith, and obviously then the calling to a permanent deacon, was that something that emerged later?
It did. When I was received into the church in 1995, I had really become very interested in the process of catechesis because of how I was brought to the faith in terms of the revelation of God to man and all of the reading I'd been doing when I was trying to sort out what was happening in my life and why all of a sudden I believed in God again. And so from my very earliest days as a Catholic, I got involved in RCIA and teaching other people, and I became a lector. And so I'd actually considered the diaconate many years back, but at the time we were raising 6 children, and so my wife and I agreed that if I did have a calling to the diaconate, it was probably not now. And so we put that off, and then but then it came back around again after we'd moved to Alabama. Mm-hmm. And when Bishop Baker put the word out that he was looking for men who might be called to the diaconate, we went and looked into it, and it did turn out to be the right time at that point.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's similar discernment as we are in a season in the Des Moines Diocese of kind of a invitation and recruitment of candidates, and so that discernment that maybe for some it is the appointed time, others perhaps in the future. Let's move into our topic here, and thank you again as a reconstructive surgeon serving in the military under duress at times, but the great skills that you manifested for our men and women in uniform, and thank you for your service as well to our country. But how, did this topic, and you touched on something where you said, even your attitude and your kind of ethic as a surgeon, that it wasn't a kind of consumerist mentality or entrepreneurial that, if people had certain desires just to simply, alter the things to give a subjective relief, that wasn't maybe your critical principle of discernment, why you would intervene and promote a therapeutic intervention. Can you say what your thought process was as you would go through evaluating a patient?
Well, Bishop, I had the great good fortune that all of my training as a young doctor was in the military, and so the idea of cosmetic surgery was interesting to me, but it wasn't obviously present in my daily life and my work in the military. So. And there was definitely was no financial dimension to the care of patients in the military either. So it was a great unburdening. I got to grow up in sort of an old school view of what it means to be a doctor. And so in reconstructive surgery, the evaluation of the patient, assessing what it was that wounded the patient, the dimensions of the defect, the loss of function, all of those things were just right at the heart of my life all through those years, and so what actually got me involved in this discussion about transgender medicine, interestingly, it was brought about by a priest. I was at a Courage conference not long after being ordained a deacon, and I was at a clergy breakout session, and there was a priest there who actually stood up and said that he felt that one day the church would catch up with the science and that we would come to understand that sexuality exists on a spectrum and that the manifestations of sexuality likewise exist on a spectrum. And I couldn't sit still and listen to that. So I raised my hand. Big mistake, raised my hand and offered my opinion about that. Well, Father Check, who was the executive director of Courage at the time, heard about that, and he said, Deacon Lappert, would you mind putting together a little talk about this subject so that we can educate our clergy about this gender ideology and transgender medicine and surgery? So that was in 2014. And the demand for that presentation has not let up even for a minute. I'm packing my bags right now to go to Pittsburgh and then Sioux City, and I'm just always on the road giving this presentation because there's such a lot of misinformation about it, and it's really so contrary to the Catholic teaching, but it's contrary even at a more foundational level to the Western thought about how we understand what it means to be a human person. But so it all began because a priest spoke erroneously, and I had to stand up and correct him. And so, of course, the church finds a job for you, and she certainly did.
The Spirit blows where it wills, but and I think you speak about there's a fundamental anthropologist here, and the church hasn't made this the issue as much as the culture and the impact it's had on the lives and minds of young people. And obviously, we love all people. We want to love them well. We want to love them truly. And so this is not in any way to try and stand in judgment over families or children who find themselves struggling with, terms of art. Do we say gender dysphoria, gender discordance, gender incongruence, or are these terms that have a professional heft, or are those kind of labels that the church is applying?
Well, all those terms grew up in the world of psychology, psychiatry. Gender identity disorder used to be what we called the condition. That term was dropped in favor of the term gender dysphoria, which is essentially an empty term because all it's saying is that somebody is unhappy about their social sexed presentation. It has absolutely nothing to do with biological realities. It only speaks to the subjective life of the person who was experiencing profound anxiety. And what the psychological world has done is it's basically said that, well, that's kind of normal to feel that way, and so we're going to call it gender dysphoria, because there was an effort to depathologize the condition, trying to present transgenderism as a form of human health and happiness. And so they came up with the term gender dysphoria, but it's a completely empty term. Gender identity disorder at least used to speak to the fact that it is a disorder, and it has to do with the internal sense of identity. But even that was a fairly weak term.
So thank you for that clarification. And obviously in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, the 5th edition, you also kind of said that even the scientific credibility of the DSM has been kind of challenged by the dissociation of the professional organization that sponsored. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah. So even around the time that the 5th edition of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual came out, the National Institutes of Mental Health, which was the funding agency that supported the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual process, they essentially came out and said that the DSM has no diagnostic or therapeutic value. They sort of come to look at it as like a bird watching manual, that it has descriptive things in it, but they have no value in terms of understanding the dynamic that causes the pathologies, or predicting outcomes or anything else. And the fact is that the DSM is driven by what we call consensus methodology, where a group, maybe 5 to 9 professionals, will gather together, and they'll discuss what terms they want to include in that edition and how they want to describe those terms. And consensus methodology is the lowest form of scientific evidence. And unfortunately, the committees that generate the terminologies in DSM are very politically motivated, as can be seen by the fact that they changed gender identity disorder to gender dysphoria. They did it for political reasons. They didn't do it because there was some discovery in the world of psychiatry. They did it because they didn't want the world to think of transgender persons as suffering from a psychiatric pathology. So they called it gender dysphoria. Show of hands. Changed the book, and it's for reasons such as that the National Institutes of Mental Health said, yeah, we don't want any part of this DSM project any longer.
And so, over and against those who say the church is totally disregarding or out of sync with the science, within the internal scientific community, in some ways it's been undermined or discredited to a large extent. But let's focus on the persons. Let's focus on maybe some of the etiology that can be attributed here. That the great increase in the incidence here, and in Iowa, the paper of record in recent weeks was again kind of chafing against the law that our Iowa legislature passed, saying that there would be no gender affirmation interventions, hormonal or surgical, until age 18 at the earliest, and saying that, well, we're going to be made refugees, having to flee to another state in a way. But why the increase in the incidence? What would you postulate?
Well, Bishop, what I would say about that is that we have a whole generation, perhaps we're into the second generation now, of very, very anxious and isolated people. We're living in a time where everybody is supposedly very connected through their digital devices, when in fact those digital devices become a process of isolation. Children are growing up in that world where they're looking at images that are flashing by about every 4 seconds. And they're growing up with tremendously anxious hearts. And when children become anxious, what the world is offering them is that they're anxious. They're told they're anxious because there's something about their sexuality that isn't working out well. And so the explanation is given to anxious children and to their parents that the reason that their child is anxious and unhappy is because they're not getting to express their sexuality the way that they're supposed to. What they like to say is how they feel themselves to be on the inside. And so it's an explanation for anxiety and sorrow, which is an untrue explanation, but it's become a very popular trope. And so then children are started in this process of social affirmation.
Even at age 5 or 6, right? I mean, or it could be
very early.
Yeah.
Very early, this is being presented to children. Children are being sexualized at a very early age. they're sort of being taught to believe that their future happiness can be defined in terms of their sexual expression, which is a horrific thing to tell to a 5 or 6 or 7-year-old child that does not have the capacity to even understand that. That's part of it, Bishop. The other part of it is that as a result of that process, children's first contact with hardcore pornography is now happening on the average about age 9. So particularly young girls are being exposed to pornography where they're seeing images of other women and young women who are being sexually violated in horrific ways. And at the same time, these young girls are being told that their future happiness lies in that. And that's something that would cause a young girl to recoil in horror, which is, I think, one of the main processes that causes girls to reject their sexual identity, their femininity, because they think that their femininity exposes them to this kind of danger and horror. So what is very common in the middle school years when girls are starting to mature sexually, physically, is that they'll become the targets of this kind of abusive thinking. Because remember, the boys are being exposed to the same pornography as the girls. And so girls will reject that, and they'll present themselves in the most asexual possible way, or they'll reject their femininity altogether. And they'll explain their anxiety, their sorrow, and their fear on the basis that they feel as if they're in the wrong body. It causes this internal dissociative process that is very damaging to young minds and hearts.
We have about 20 seconds before we're going to take a break, Dr. Deacon. And so the shift in the incidence in the last decade or more, where before this was primarily a condition among males, now females are the preponderance of cases. Is that true?
That's correct. It used to be 2 in 10,000 children, virtually all of them boys. Now it's over 70% girls. It used to be pre-adolescent children, prepubertal children. Now it's virtually all adolescent and young adult females.
Okay. We'll pause there, but obviously we're really getting into the depths of something that is very disturbing. So
we're going to take a quick break. You're listening to Making It Personal with Bishop Joensen.
Support for Iowa Catholic Radio provided by the Sarah Vocations Ministry, including the St. Sarah Club of Des Moines and the Sarah Club of Council Bluffs. Sarah is an apostolate of the Worldwide Catholic Church dedicated to fostering and supporting priesthood and religious vocations. Sarahans strive to accomplish their mission through prayer, fellowship, and service to the bishop, priests, sisters, and all in religious formation, and in doing so to increase their own holiness. Learn more at joinsarah.org, joinserra.org. Thank you, Sarahans, for your support of Iowa Catholic Radio.
Thank you to our business partner Chip In for Charity, the St. Vincent de Paul Golf Fundraiser to fight hunger, Thursday, May 25th at Copper Creek Golf Course, 10 a.m. shotgun start. For registration and sponsorship opportunities, visit svdpdsm.org.
Support for Iowa Catholic Radio is provided by Ashworth Vision Clinic. Complete eye exams, contact lenses, glasses, glaucoma testing, and urgent eye issues. 515-440-4610, ashworthvision.com.
Welcome back to Making It Personal with Bishop Joensen. We are back with Dr. Deacon Lappert, board-certified plastic and reconstructive surgeon.
So you've kind of painted a picture of a social milieu where, without a scientific foundation, but just kind of in the enlistment of technology, pornography, and all this, we're really, it's a kind of an assault on the minds and hearts of our young people who are striving for some basis of identity and this sense of a God who loves them, a God who creates them good, male or female, has kind of been abdicated in a way. What kinds of points would you want to elaborate? I know you speak to children. I know you speak to parents and parishioners, and obviously you have a hand in litigation as well. Are some constant themes that you want to strike for people that might lead us to some good news?
Well, yes, Bishop. So the first thing I would want to do is to relieve people of this anxiety that children who suffer with these internal identity issues are at horrific or high risk of suicide. While there is a very high rate of self-harming, the suicide rate is very much overstated, and it's actually used as kind of a cudgel against the parents to drive the decision-making in the direction of what's called affirmation, social transitioning, medical and surgical transitioning. The fact is there is a higher than normal suicide rate there, but you see it in people who have fully transitioned, who have been taken through this entire social, medical, and surgical process. What we find is basically what is claimed to be the cure for self-harm and suicide is not efficacious at all, because fully transitioned persons have a 20 times higher likelihood of killing themselves than the age and sex matched general population. So that's a lie. It's a lie that transitioning a child is going to save them from suicide. So that's the first thing I want to say. The second thing I want to say is there is tremendous, tremendous hope in this, and we're seeing that now in the people who have come forward who are detransitioning, particularly these very courageous young women who have been dragged through this whole process and then had an awakening to the realities of their life, the truth of their life, the truth that God made them in a beautiful way. That very truth is the person of Jesus Christ, and so there's great hope there. This is a very trying time for many, many people, but there is a real and lasting hope in the presentation of the truth and the recovery of the life of these children and these suffering families.
What would be your counsel to someone who says, well, but, in the midst of the struggle and the sense that maybe wanting to at least kind of push the pause button with puberty blockers and things, why can't we kind of go into that suspended state for a while? Are there medical sequelae that would argue against that?
Yes, Bishop. So the use of puberty blockade as a pause button is not based in science at all. There is not even safety data to support the idea that giving puberty blockade to an adolescent child is good for them at all. There's so many things that rely on signaling from the sex hormones that are produced in puberty, the growth of the child, the skeletal growth, the muscle mass, the coordination, the higher executive functioning, even their adult sexual processes, psychological and everything, is all driven by those hormones. It's not a pause button, because what the puberty blockade will do to the child is it will make them stop growing and developing, and in very short order that they won't even look at all like their peers, and they'll want to go on to puberty, but they've been told that their future happiness resides in cross-sex presentation. So what was sold as the pause button is really a go button, because within a year or two, the child is demanding cross-sex hormones. So virtually 100% of children started on puberty blockade will go on to cross-sex hormones, and there is no scientific evidence, even of safety, that doing that to a human being is a good idea.
Okay, and those are the sobering facts. And we could obviously have you for another half hour here, Doctor, and we have to unfortunately close. But your sense of the good news, is it going to be the gospel proclaimed in itself, or is it going to be the litigation you think that ultimately arrests this kind of cultural momentum?
Well, all of those things together, the gospel, because this is God's revelation of who he is, and in revealing that, he reveals to us who we are. And this is all about the truth of who we are. And the truth of who we are is coming out in a number of different ways, including the truth of who we are as it's presented in courts of law, because these litigations center around the scientific evidence. And the scientific evidence for doing this to children is not there.
And that'll be our kind of final note here, Deacon Dr. Lappert. Thank you so much. God bless your ministry and work, setting the record straight for so many different constituencies. So may the Spirit be with you.
Thank you, Bishop, and thank you for your kind invitation.
This has been another edition of Making It Personal with Bishop Joensen.
You can hear Making It Personal with Bishop William Joensen every week on Iowa Catholic Radio and iowacatholicradio.com.
Support for Iowa Catholic Radio and Making It Personal is provided by Sarah Vocations Ministry. Learn more at joinserra.org.